Yes.
The man who's been around the world, he's seen every single eclipse since the beginning of the year. Mike Eclipse.
Oh my
It's either
God.
Vita or
Sheesh. Hi, Lynn. Get in here.
Vita or the
I just got back from work.
I know you did.
We'll give you
I'm just
3 minutes to
torturing
get
you.
in.
Yeah, no.
Yeah, so let me tell you a little bit about this bizarre passion that I have for chasing eclipses. John had mentioned, well, there's people that, chase tornadoes. And chasing eclipses is a little safer than that. But doesn't necessarily need to be. I was in Zimbabwe amongst packs of elephants with fresh giant tracks that went down this deep to get back to the place where you've got to be. Why am I having to get back to the place where you've got to be? The answer to that is because the eclipses aren't everywhere. Total solar eclipses fall at a very specific place on a path that could be 10,000 miles long and only 60 miles wide. That's it. So if you're not in the middle of that line somewhere, this way and this way, then you're not going to experience what a total solar eclipse is. So for us, it was always in search of where to be on that line. So in that 10,000 miles, it's like your first time that you take a look at what that path looks like, you start to figure out, well, where's the weather going to be best? That's the very first filter that you go through. You want to be in a place where the weather's going to be decent. You want to go to, in this particular case, this last eclipse, you're going to say, well, I'll probably avoid the Pacific Northwest because it has 300 days a year of, overcast and rain. Which it didn't at this particular time of year on this eclipse, but that's another story. So that's the first filter. Second filter that you look at is that you want to have some altitude. You want to be up a little bit so that you can look down and see the shadow coming. So that's another piece of it. And the third one is, where do you want to be? If in 2024, a great place to be to watch the eclipse here back in the United States would be Dallas. No thanks, I'm not going to Dallas to watch an eclipse when I could be in Mexico or some other really cool little lake along the way and enjoy it. So that's the filter that I have to go through when I figure out where I want to go. So I've seen 12 so far, and those are the total eclipses. There are other eclipses. There's the lunar eclipse. I'm not into lunar eclipses. I'm a solar eclipse guy. A totalitarian is what you probably refer to us as, or an umbraphile. People who love to be in that dark black place, the umbra of the eclipse. And the lunar eclipses happen with much more frequency, and those are nighttime people. And I don't fraternize with those. I'm a daytime eclipse person. The nighttime people, strange. They're a little freaky. So we don't deal with lunar eclipses. I will barely walk outside to look at a lunar eclipse. But I will go literally around the world to see a total solar eclipse and have. I'm going to tell you just a few of my little experiences with the solar eclipse in various countries that will be of a little amusement. But I want to explain, first of all, what this passion really is. Because I get interviewed a lot in radio and newspapers, and they ask, the first question is like, why does this matter? Why do you care? And the real answer to this question is, for me, that this is the biggest single natural event that happens in our lives that is not destructive. It's not Harvey, it's not Irma, it's not an earthquake that just happened down in Mexico, and it's not a tsunami that ruins 300,000 lives in an afternoon. It's this celestial event with what's called a syzygy. Great word. S-Y-Z-Y-G-Y, syzygy. And that is the alignment of these three objects, of any three celestial objects, is a syzygy. In this particular case, sun, moon, earth. And you would think that these things would actually happen every month, when you think about it, right? So if this is the sun, and this is the moon, and this is the earth, the moon is going around the earth every month. Why isn't it eclipsing every month? And the answer is because it's 3% off kilter. And because it's 3% off kilter, it hits only at certain what they call nodes, N-O-D-E-S. When you hit one of those nodes, you will get a total solar eclipse. But it's a little more complicated than that. Our luck in having these things on this planet is extraordinary. Because there's it's math, it's pure math. First of all, we have a round moon. There's 158 moons in our solar system. There's only 12, 13, 14 round moons. All the others are not round. So that's a big factor. It's got to be a round moon. Mars has two little asteroids that are locked into orbit. They look like potatoes. They're not round. They would never make an eclipse. They might eclipse the sun completely, but they would never give the perspective that we get, that aura that we get, where it is completely and totally eclipsed exactly over the sun's surface. So, the math is this. The moon is 400 times in diameter smaller than the sun, diameter, and it is 400 times closer than the sun. That equation, given a round moon, and now we have these two objects that fit almost exactly over each other. And it happens in two ways. This is on an elliptical orbit, right? So the moon and the sun they're not circular orbits, they're elliptical orbits. And this is an interesting thought. When is summertime in the northern hemisphere? When we are closest to the sun on this elliptical orbit, or farthest from the sun on the elliptical orbit?
I'm going to guess far.
It's when we are the farthest. The summertime in the north is when we were on the far end of this elliptical orbit. So if they're both orbiting elliptically, the moon every 29 days, the earth every 365 days, some of them are closer and some of them are further away. And it depends upon where they happen to be at the time of that eclipse. If it is a total solar eclipse, the moon appears to be larger in the sky than the sun. If it's a thing they called an annular eclipse, it's the opposite. The moon appears to be smaller in the sky than the sun. And the net of that is this ring of fire in the sky. They fit perfectly over each other, but they don't cover each other. The moon does not obscure the sun that's coming through. It fits inside. So those are the total eclipses, annular eclipses and total solar eclipses. And then you have the lunar eclipse. My fascination with the total solar eclipses is real simple. It just plugs me back in. This is the most natural thing that you can do, to stand out there and to watch this and to experience the obliteration of the sun in the middle of the day at high noon, gone. And you have this shadow that falls over where you are. The one that just crossed the United States did so in 90 minutes, coast to coast. And it was the first time it went coast to coast since 1918. So it's been almost 100 years since we had a coast-to-coast eclipse in the United States. The scratches, this path that happens all over the earth, they're all over the place. They're not just all linear like you would imagine. Some go vertically, some go horizontally, and it would take me a long time physically to describe why that happens. The next one in 2024, if you draw a line from Dallas to Buffalo, New York, that's the path. And it starts way down in Mexico. The middle of the eclipse is right in the United States, and it goes off into Canada and disappears around the backside of the earth. Over where we were up in Wyoming, it traveled at 1,800 miles an hour. That's how fast the actual shadow moved across the ground. The total eclipse shadow moved across the ground. So it was really an extraordinary experience, because normally what we have to do is travel huge amounts of distance. So to give you some idea, Thailand, Zimbabwe, South Africa, Egypt, Siberia, Baja California, Montana, Hungary, those were all eclipses that I went to, so it gives you some idea of where I had to travel to. The longest one was in China. That was, I don't know, 12,000 miles or something like that, where I had to get there to actually make it happen. Outside of a Ming dynasty, on the side of a Ming dynasty. The other one was in Australia. And that was an interesting one because that was right at sunrise. So just as the sun was coming up, and that means we could be on a beach. And I was sitting there on that beach and I met this guy on the beach that was there, and we got to be good friends over the 2 or 3 days that this whole thing was taking place. And that's my friend Marcel, who came here from Germany. And he, at 17 and a half, 18 years old, just turned 18 years old, decided to make the trip all the way to Australia. And why? What is it? Why did you even know about it? Why?
I didn't even know there was an eclipse coming up in Australia. I just went to Australia for my gap year.
Oh, is that right?
And a couple of days before the eclipse was to be in Australia, someone told me. So I had to drive 1,000 miles up from Brisbane.
To see this thing.
To see the
and
eclipse.
why did you think it was special? Why would you go there?
I don't know, I've never seen a total solar eclipse, so I had to see one. I mean, I was in Australia and it's just 1,000 miles north. So.
Right. Yeah, that was it. And so we had broken clouds that day. So you can do everything that you can do to be there, to have everything organized, to have everything in order that you have to plan starting, a year away, figuring out where you want to be, how to get there, how to have some kind of accommodations, to actually have somebody take care of you. So I use this thing called couchsurfing.com. It's absolutely a great website. It's where you can go on there and you ask someone, can you have access to a bed or some kind of sleeping accommodations in their house. And I do it on every eclipse. And what I do when I go to these eclipses is I get them to make a commitment to me, a significant time out. And by the time I arrive, they're really well invested in me and the fact that I'm traveling 10,000 miles to come see the eclipse. They want to really help me. When I arrived in Indonesia, the guy had a sign at the airport saying, Michael. When I got out, he drove me down to, handed me $500 in Indonesian money, drove me down to a speed boat, put me on the speedboat. I went across to an island.
Wow.
There was a car waiting for me on the island. I took the car across the other side of the island, and there was a hotel accommodation waiting for me, kind of a bed and breakfast place for me on the other side of the island. And that was all arranged by him because he felt such a sense of ownership, of wanting to be involved in this whole process. And so that's the way it's been with every single one of my Couchsurfer hosts. And I invited them all to come over. One guy who hosted me in Moscow came over, and Marcel came over. And he and I just met there at the eclipse. But the idea that he had seen one and we had been together was really an important piece for me of wanting to continue that camaraderie through eclipses. People ask if I see the same people at the eclipse all the time, and the answer is, it's 10,000 miles long, and somewhere on there you're going to put yourself. And so the idea of actually seeing people repeatedly is kind of crazy. But people that do chase eclipses are a little strange. They tend to have big beards with lots of food in them. They tend to have white shirts with pocket protectors that they miss all the time, and there's usually ink marks on their pockets. And generally, astrophysicists, and they're studying solar, planetary science and that kind of stuff. And then others are people just like me, total groupie, just interested in being there and being under the shadow. There's a registry that they have that I am a part of people that go to these eclipses. And I just moved up from number 50 on the registry to number 49. So I'm really proud. Thank you. Thank you. So 49 means that I've had 37 minutes of shadow totality, total totality in my life. And, what is that really like? Well, before we were in Wyoming at this at this last venture, and by the way, let me just back up and explain what that was, what came about to make that happen. This is the first time that I didn't have to travel 10,000 miles to go see an eclipse somewhere, right? It was 500 miles up to centerline from where I live in Colorado. So I had to make my way up to either Wyoming or Nebraska. Okay, cross out Nebraska. Not interested, no thank you. So it's got to be somewhere in Wyoming. So I have a friend who I went to my first eclipse with 38 years ago in Montana. That's where I got the hook. It was 38 years ago in Montana. Just a kid going on up there, seeing what this thing was like, and just seeing this and wondering how I could maybe do this for the rest of my life. So I started seeing eclipses, realizing I could just get on an airplane and go where they are, and do it again, and then do it again, and then plan it, and make this a real hobby, a real passion to go do it. This particular one, it was like, I've got all these friends and family. I've got people from overseas that hosted me. I should host them. I should take them up. So I said, I'm going to get an RV, and I'll put 4 or 5 friends in the RV, and let's go. And the one RV turned into 2 RVs, which turned into 3 RVs, which turned into a pop-up camper, and then another RV, and then a Class B RV, and 2 Class C RVs. And now we have all of these RVs going up there, and campers, and trucks, and cars. And I'm writing them letters saying that there's mosquitoes, and you have to be careful of bears, so make sure you have proper bear spray. And the list goes on and on and on of all the things that I had to pay attention to. Because these are people that are now under my care. They're going to a place I've selected, right? It's out in the middle of nowhere. There's no services. There's nothing that's out there. No cell phone coverage. I mean, we're going to a place where there's nothing. And I had a friend in California who I went to this first eclipse with. He worked at the planetarium in Denver. And he decided that he was going to sit down and just study every inch of Google Earth, looking at it from a satellite, and he poured through everything that he could find, and he sees this pristine little lake that looks like a kind of a figure 8. And it's sitting 2,500 feet from center line. That's the place you want to be. That's the sweet spot. That's the point of longest totality. Because that's the place where the 2 of them cross completely over each other's axes, right? A partial eclipse is this, where they just miss each other, right? So you want to get that fully aligned, and the place to do that is on this thing called center line. So that was 0.043 seconds off of center line. I can do that. 2 minutes and 30 seconds, that's that. I'm fine with that. So Mark says to me, Michael, I want you to go take a look at this. And he sends me the coordinates. I look at it, it's incredible. We start thinking about it. I get on with the Wyoming authorities. Hey, can I go to that lake? Yeah, no, you can go to the lake. It's a state forest. And, there's no problem going down there. Well, are there any services there? No. It's very remote. There's nothing down there with mosquitoes and bears. Okay, it sounds interesting. And I start looking at the main road, a gravel road, and start looking at the road going back to the lake, and it looks terrific. It looks like it's a little, not 2-laner, but it's not a 1-track. It looks a little wider than a 1-track, and it's clearly been used before. So I call up the Wyoming people, and they say, you're not getting any RVs back there. There's no way an RV that's got a clearance like this is going to make it back on that road. We go back there all the time. There's jutting rocks, there's pits, and there's large, long dips and a 30-foot wheel span, base, what do they call that?
Wheelbase.
Wheelbase of a RV is not gonna. It's gonna bottom out. It's just gonna be high side. So I get my friend who is an airline pilot, and he says, I got the keys to a friend's private plane. And I get in this plane with him, and we go up there. While I'm up in the plane, I look down, there's a little plate saying, this is an experimental aircraft, not approved by the Federal Aviation Administration. Travel at your own risk. It's like, oh great. Right at that point, I'm over the Wind River Range. There's nothing but peaks and valleys down there. You go down, they will never find you again. I just kept hearing Buddy Holly songs in my head. This wasn't going to work out. We finally land in Pinedale. We rent a car. We go back there, and we're standing there looking at this thing, and it's like, oh boy, this is going to be a challenge. But I think maybe we can do it. We take a bunch of video of the ground, and it looks like it's okay. When I bring the video back, I send it off to my RV experts who take a look at this thing, and they say, I think we're probably pretty good. And all of this was awesome until all of our vehicles arrived up there and people start walking on this road going, there's no clearance for these. You are going to rip the plumbing out of the bottom of these RVs. This is no good. But I had a trump card. My trump card is that we had on board a Commodore who had 17, 18 years of expertise in recreational vehicle driving. And more importantly than all that, in his quiver, a can-do, let's do it attitude. And a couple of other people on the team that said yes. That person is sitting back over here, Russell Swanson, my dear friend, the Commodore of our RV fleet, who on my trust, on my word, said, you know, you got to fly in from New Jersey and not just drive the RV and feed all of us, which was not the intention. My intention was I must share this with you. These are the kinds of things I share with Russell and with dear friends. And I don't want you to miss this. I travel all over the world to see these things. I want you with me. So he takes on the role. Let's do it. I can do it. We'll get all the RVs all set up. We arrive there and somebody gets down on their hands and knees and they're on the ground and they're yelling out instructions to Russell. He's the first RV going back. Passenger hard right. Driver harder driver. And we go back at a half a mile an hour. It took us an hour and a half to go 1 mile back to this lake. And it's hot. And there are mosquitoes all over the place. We're all dying out there and we don't know if it's going to work. And as we go down this road, the idea that if it doesn't work, we're really screwed because the cars and SUVs can all get back there with no problem. And they're the ones that should have gone in first, but we decided to take the RV in first. If the RV got waylaid in some way, if it broke down, if it blew a tire, any of those kinds of things, we're stuck. That road is blocked, no one is getting back there, and the whole trip with now 61 people, 13 vehicles, is trashed. But he's there at the helm, driving this thing, easing it in and out of rocks, up and over things. And let me just show you an example of how that worked. This would be a rock that was sticking up. And here would be the level on the RV. And they figured out that if they put a sandbag up to the upper left, somewhere up there near the front tire, that as the low piece of the RV arrived at this rock, it would go up and over the rock and down on the other side and out. And when I saw this for the first time, it was just like I was as near tears as you can get. No, I wasn't. I was in tears. Because I knew that if we did that all the way back there, rock by rock, dip by dip, we were going to get those things back there, and it was going to happen. And one vehicle goes back, and then we get the next one and it goes back, and the next one goes back, and everyone is now situated in a beautiful place right by this lake.
And is Russell driving them all?
And Russell drove the first one.
Russell's
And did you get out and redrive?
Yeah, I drove 2 of the 3.
He drove two of the 3. Who drove the third one?
Truck. Or
Mark Trump, right. So our other friend, and he drove it back there. So yes, once he proved that it could happen, once you get one back there, no one else could be a naysayer. But boy, were there naysayers. And not only naysayers, there were jerks. There was a guy that was coming out as we were going in, and the person said to us, I came up and I said, why would you be leaving? Why are you leaving here? What's going on back there? Because we hadn't been back yet. We had just arrived with all of our vehicles. There's somebody coming out. The Eclipse is 2 days away. Why would you be doing that? And he goes, it's too filled with people. There's no way I'm going to get back there. This is a huge meadow. I mean, my dream was to have just our group back there and maybe a few other sorted people, but I didn't want 1,000 people back in our meadow. And the guy said, no, it's absolutely filled. And I said, it can't be filled. It's a giant meadow. Don't tell me that it's filled. He goes, dude, sorry, man. The place is absolutely packed. There's no room, and so we had to turn around and come back out. It was a total lie. When we came up and over that hill and looked down there, there were 5 or 6 vehicles down there. They were all ours, plus 3 or 4 others that were there that we didn't know anything about. And we settled all of our vehicles into this encampment and stayed for 3 days in one of the most beautiful, pristine locations you could ever possibly imagine. That was an eclipse that was my gift to all of the people that were there. But boy, the others also had all their challenges. I arrived in Thailand and I was in Bangkok and needing to get up north to go to Centerline up there, and I went to the concierge at the Marriott Hotel. I knew the guy who owned the Marriott and he put me up for a couple of days. Can you please call up there and ask if there's any hotel rooms anywhere along Centerline? She made 3 phone calls and said, no, fully booked, no problem, fully booked. I read in paper, fully booked, there's no rooms, accommodations finished. And I'm going, that's not the way it works. There's rooms, somebody just didn't show up, we got to keep going. So I made her for the next 2 days, she got on, she power dialed every single place up there. And on one of them, I hear her say, okay, all right, okay, thank you. And then hangs up and she says to me, well, they don't take reservations, but they don't, so they have, all their rooms are empty. So it's like, wow, I need to have one of those rooms. Call the man back and you can get him to book it if you just repeat what I say. So we called back, she convinced the guy to give me a room. He ends up picking me up at the train with he had a 12-year-old boy who sadly was maybe 300 pounds, and he supposedly spoke fluent English. He had a dictionary, a Thai dictionary. He spoke maybe 3 words. He said hello, and that was probably the end of his entire vocabulary. They take me to a motel. It's a U-shaped motel, and when I arrive, they get in there and they take me to my room, and when I walk in the room, it's a round bed with neon lights around the back side of the bed, and there is a mirror over the bed on top, and stacked on top of the pillowcase were probably 15 condoms that were there, and I'm going, I have no idea what this is. This is really interesting, but I'm right on center line, and that's all that matters to me. And it was a, quote, love motel where they don't take reservations because everything's hourly. And people were showing up hourly, and I was sitting there in the window watching all these couples go in and out, and all intrigued by, the different assortments of who would go with who. I know what it would look like in the States, but I had no idea what that might look like in Thailand. So that was my experience in a sex motel in Thailand. The next day was the eclipse, and so the guy shows up, and he told me that he would drive me to where Centerline is, and that he had been reading in the paper that there was a bat cave that was up there, and he wanted to take me up to the bat cave because the scientists from the University of Thailand said that when the eclipse occurred, 1 million bats were going to come out of the cave, right? I think I've got to be at that one. First of all, I'm staying in a sex motel. Second of all, this guy's claiming 1 million bats are going to come out. This sounds really good to me. So I go with him, except that when I arrive the next morning, he's waiting for me in his little van out in front, packed with family. I mean his entire family, every aunt, uncle, cousin you could possibly imagine, are packed into this van with the front seat completely open just for me, and everybody is in there. Talk about, he learned the word squalor the other day, and this was just, there were animals in there, their food was everywhere. I was ready to go up to this thing. So later on, I'm thinking about this, and I'm going, they're in a cave. Don't bats sleep during the day? Don't they have eyelids? If they have eyelids and they're in a cave, they're not going to know there's an eclipse. And of course, not one bat came out. These were these biologists from the University of Thailand that were exclaiming, these bats are going to come out. I'm later telling this story to Jane Goodall, and she's going, it's ridiculous. They work on a clock. They don't have their eyes open if it gets dark. What if there's a cloud or a storm? They don't all come out. It's just silly. Why would they ever think that? But these guys actually thought that. Every single one of these eclipse trips had some completely bizarre, wild thing. Up here tonight is going to be Stuart, and Stuart will be performing. Stuart joined me in Hungary for an eclipse. So Russell's been to one eclipse with me now up in Wyoming. He's now been to 2 eclipses with me. And that's just in our midst here. So I'm going to just continue to do this. I have 19 more to go before I'm 96. And the next one is in Chile. And the one after that is in Argentina. After that is in Antarctica. Wow. And I'm not exactly sure how I'm going to make that happen. The last time it was in Antarctica, they charged $35,000 to get on a Russian freighter. And you can get on the freighter and make your way there. And I just figured it's going to be a low eclipse, right, because it's down there. And there's going to probably be ground blizzards, and you're going to likely not be able to see anything. So the last one, that indeed happened, but I have a pledge to go see as many eclipses as I can. And that was it. We did make glasses for the eclipse, and Leslie got her pair.
Yeah, thank you
And
very much.
I do have a warning on the eclipse
Quite a few.
glasses. And it says, warning that the moon, see the eclipses now, the moon is receding, and that it says that in 600 million years there will no longer be eclipses because the moon is changing its relationship to the earth, and it's going to reach a point where the moon will be too small to ever eclipse the sun. So
600 million.
600 million years. So I want you all, if you have a chance to see eclipse, make sure you see it and you get it in under your belt. One final story, and I have one for absolutely every place that I went to, but we're in Egypt. And I picked this kid up who was an astro student in Cairo. Threw him in a car because I needed to have an Egyptian with me. You got to have somebody speaking Arabic. You can't just venture off in a rental car across Egypt. So I piled in Mohammed Osama. That's his name. Bizarre, right? And he had never met an American before, so he was very excited about that. And he grew up in Saudi Arabia. So what he really wanted to do was to meet girls, and spent the entire trip asking me how you meet girls, because he just had no idea how one goes about that process. And he would say,
How old was he?
He said, probably 25,
Oh, really?
26, something like that. And he had moved to go to the university to study astroscience. So Muhammad and I went all the way across. We went to the Libyan border, and there was a little plateau up there, and that was the place where it slid across the corner of Egypt. Because the real eclipse, the kind of the biggest part of the path was in Libya, and you couldn't go to Libya. So that was Gaddafi era, and couldn't do that. So there I was, and in came the President Mubarak by helicopter. All morning long was nothing but fog. It was it's like we arrived there. I could not see Russell. That's how close, dense the fog was. And they just said, don't worry, don't worry. The eclipse is at 1 o'clock. Around 12 o'clock, it'll all burn off. And at 12:01, it just started burning off. And at 12:10, the sky was absolutely blue. And so I'm there, and somebody taps me on the shoulder before the eclipse and says, excuse me, I'm the producer for Egyptian television. Is there any chance that I could have you, on the air talking about it? I understand that you've seen many eclipses, and most people here have never seen an eclipse before. So could you come and talk to us? Sure, of course I will. So I got on the air, and I'm talking, and I'm all passionate about eclipses as I am. And afterwards, the producer came back to me, and she said, so they just called from Cairo, and they asked if you could narrate the eclipse. Well, I was there with 8 other people that I was hosting at that eclipse, helping them better understand what was going on. I didn't want to go on television. I wanted to be with my friends. But I thought, okay, maybe. And they said there's a big giant tent underneath there, and here's where the monitor and the microphone was. And I'm going, let me get this right. I've just traveled 8,000 miles to come here and sit under a tent and talk into a microphone, watching the eclipse on a little black and white monitor? You've got to be kidding me. That's not happening. So I explained that. I said, I'll come in afterwards, but I'm not going to do that. So the next thing I see them do, they're hauling the entire little studio out from underneath the tent so that I could actually sit there and look up and watch it. So I decided to do it. Later on, when I went back to my hotel, which was halfway back to Cairo, I was greeted in the parking lot by all the people that were there. They took me to this wonderful dinner because I was now famous. I had been on Egyptian television, and it was a wonderful story. They had ushered me right into where Mubarak was. So I had held on to the coattail of one of these security guys and went back there, and I did my broadcast probably 5 feet from President Mubarak. And after the broadcast was over, they pulled everything down, said thank you to me, but I was still close to Mubarak. But then the TV people didn't need me anymore, and all their security left me. So now the Egyptian authorities are grabbing me and hauling me away so that I didn't have to be anywhere near him. It's like it was okay as long as I was on TV, but the minute they didn't need me, get out of here. So it was fun. That was a completely fun thing, being hauled into Egyptian television. And, you know, I have a million other stories about other things that went on. Baja Eclipse was my longest one. That was about 7 minutes long. And I'll have another really long one, 6 minutes long, and that will be when I'm 96 years old. And that will be back here in the United States. And that'll be 6 minutes long. So your assignment is to get me
totally.
to wherever it is. I like you said totally. That's your responsibility. I took you this time. You need to make sure I get up there when I'm 96 years old.
I'll take you there.
Yeah, and you can do that. So anyway, any thoughts or ideas, ma'am?
Question.
Yes.
So, have you ever gone to one where the weather did not cooperate and you actually couldn't?
Yeah, so this registry is an interesting thing because when I go there, I can't cheat. You have to plug in exactly what your latitude and longitude is, so they can figure out exactly how long the eclipse was that you're in. And the only thing that you can tell them is what the sky was like. So I have what they call 2 lucky holes. One of them was down in Australia, where it started out at the very beginning of totality. It was in a cloud, and the cloud parts, and we got the brilliance of that eclipse coming through.